All right, but we're going to start with the shortest of our short stories, A Clean, Well-Lighted Place by Ernest Hemingway. We went into the lengthy Hemingway biography last Thursday, so you don't need to suffer through another biography of Ernest Hemingway. But in some ways, this tiny little story is perhaps the greatest insight into Hemingway, the person, that we're going to get. And it's tragic. It is a tragic insight, but it tells us a lot about Hemingway, the man. It is entirely nihilistic in character. The story itself is entirely nihilistic in character, and the story itself is just simply a purely nihilistic story. All right, I'm sorry, I said A.H., it's supposed to be A.E. Hotchner said that Hemingway told him that this was his favorite story. Hemingway called this his favorite short story, and I think the reason might be because The Old Waiter, I think, was Hemingway. I think that's how he viewed himself. The story is only 1,438 words in length, possibly even a couple less. As short stories go, that's about a third of the size of a normal short story. Typical short story, the average length is around 5,000 words, if there is such a thing as a typical or average short story. So anyway, this is like roughly a third of a typical short story. So it's very, very short. Not as short as his tiny little 6-word story, but nonetheless very short. And he does pack a tremendous amount of thought and idea into this very short story. The location is Spain in a clean, well-lighted cafe, which of course becomes relevant shortly. And then later on it is the action, if you want to call it action. There's not a lot of action involved, but the location switches to a well-lighted and not quite so clean little bar, a bodega. And the characters are the old man. And by the way, nobody gets a name in this story. This is a very everyman kind of a story. So every single character is an everyman of some sort. And the old man is simply an old man, and he's drunken, and he's had some sort of a life. He's got money, but he is clearly tired of living. The young waiter is a young fellow full of life. He's married. He's got a wife at home in bed. He can't wait to close the restaurant or the cafe so he can get home to his wife and just enjoy his life at home. And then there's the old waiter, who is the true nihilist in this. He is the just tragically empty individual. I think that's the best word for him. He is just utterly empty. And then the barman is actually just kind of the only one here who is just sort of he's not really part of the story. He's just there for a moment for someone to actually is kind of a reflection of the old waiter, but in a different setting. Okay. So when you see, when I have it up here and you see this font, hopefully you can read that. If not, maybe we can turn the lights down just a hair because it is a little hard to read. When you see this font, which is basically like the old style typewriter, it's called Courier. When you see the Courier font, then I'm quoting directly from the story. Okay, so here it says, the two waiters inside the cafe knew that the old man was a little drunk, and while he was a good client, they knew that if he became too drunk, he would leave without paying, so they kept watch on him. Last week he tried to commit suicide, one waiter said. Why? He was in despair. What about? Nothing. How do you know it was nothing? He has plenty of money. So that's kind of the first exchange that we see. In fact, it is the first dialogue in the short story. And it's the two waiters discussing this poor old guy, and almost now one thing we know from it is that he's apparently mostly deaf, maybe even completely deaf. So they could talk about him without having to fear being overheard. So they're talking about him. And almost casually. And it doesn't even say which one, notice. And he does that a lot in this story. He doesn't say who's saying what, although I get the sense that the one talking about the event would be the older waiter. He would be more in touch with what's going on. And he says, he almost committed suicide. Why? He was in despair. About what? Nothing. And right there, Hemingway brings us to the key and central theme of the story, which is nothingness. See, to a nihilist, we talked last Thursday, the nihilist says life is pure chance, life is a flip of the coin, life is meaningless. Beyond meaningless, it is actually nothing at all when you get down to the depths of it, as Hemingway does here in this story. It actually comes down to, this story could almost be like the theme song of nihilism. Because ultimately, and we're going to get to it in just a minute, they actually have kind of a creed, kind of the nihilist's creed going on here. And it all comes down to this one word, nothing. But I also find it very interesting that when he gets to this question, why did he come up? What do you mean it was nothing? How do you know it was nothing? He says, well, he has plenty of money. As if the only reason that someone would commit suicide is because he's either completely empty or he's completely broke, right? Like those are the only two reasons why someone could commit suicide. So again, nihilism shows itself in this sense as being really shallow, isn't it? I mean, there's a lot of stuff that people go through that's somewhere between being utterly empty and just being broke. So here's some things about the old man. So now you're going to get your page out now. You should be looking at your page. The old man has plenty of money, and he has a niece who cares about him. You remember from the story that the younger waiter says, well, how did he try to kill himself? The older waiter says he hung himself. Not he tried to hang himself, he hung himself. Well, who cut him down? He says his niece. His niece, basically cut the rope, cut him down before he could die. So he has money, and he has a niece who cares about him. So for most of us, you've got your needs taken care of, your basic physical needs taken care of, and you have at least one person who cares about you. Isn't that something to live for? So there's a certain peculiar irony going on in the background here. Okay, but what does the old man lack? And that's why I put question marks. I want to ask you. And what you're going to write down here is your ideas or the ideas that you hear someone else express that you think are really interesting ideas. So let me turn it over to you for a moment. What does the old man lack? Yes. Hope. He clearly lacks hope. There is no question that is the single most important thing that he lacks. He lacks hope. What else does he lack? What? Happiness. Yeah, for whatever reason, he doesn't seem to have any happiness that we can discern. The closest he gets to happiness is in the bottom of a jar of alcohol or glass of alcohol. It's a pretty shallow life. So he seems to be lacking happiness. What else is he lacking?
Maybe drive and aspiration.
An aspiration. He's not aspiring to anything. And maybe because he's old and he's deaf and he just doesn't have anything else to live for. So he's lacking aspiration. And really, that's kind of one of the things that drives all of us, isn't it? Keeps us going from day to day. We're aspiring to something. There's something we're hoping to succeed in. And lacking that, maybe that was part of his nothing. Any other thoughts on this? Love. He has a niece who cares about him, but there doesn't appear to be any real love going on in his life. There's no one that he feels responsible to or for. So, yeah, maybe he's lacking love. I think I would add one more thing. He's lacking faith. If he had any kind of a sincere faith, he would have someplace else to turn. So I think I would add that too. So there's a lot of possibilities. Add the one that you like, write whichever ones you think fits your understanding of the story and the character. Okay. The young waiter has certain things, and he lacks certain things. What are the things, according to the story, that he has? This actually gets very specific. Yes, he has family. What else? What else does he have? The story is very specific about. He has a job. Right? It specifically says he has a job. Now, when you say he has money, sometimes that might be indicating that he's in some way well off, and I don't think he is. He's working at 3 o'clock in the morning at a cafe, so he's not exactly rich, but he has a job, so he's got enough money to get by on. Yes? He has a wife to go home to, or somebody else already said family, so yes. He has a wife to go home to. He has a job, and there's one of the things the story specifically mentions that he has. Full of life. Get a little more. Huh? Well, he has motivations, he has aspirations, he has all of that, but the story specifically says you have this, this, and this. And what was the third one? I'm going to give you have youth, confidence, and a job. You have youth, confidence, and a job. All right, so the young man has these things. He has youth, confidence. That goes to what you were talking about. And somebody else said something in terms of aspirations. So these are things that he has. He has this confidence. He believes still in the future. He believes in something, right? And a job. And of course, we know that he also has a family. So I guess you could say there are 4 things at least that the story specifies that he has. Okay, so to go back, what does he lack? What does the young man lack? Patience. He appears to be lacking patience, yes. He's impatient. However, it's 2:30 in the morning and you want to get home to your family. I can understand a little lack of patience there.
Wisdom?
Perhaps he lacks some wisdom. Wisdom comes with age and he's young. He seems to be lacking a bit of compassion. I would agree with you there. He seems to have very little concern for the old man, really. It's just sort of a curiosity, when he talks about him, it's not about, oh, but what can we do for him? You never hear that come up from anybody, right? There doesn't seem to be a great deal of compassion going on. So there are some things that we can draw out of the story that he's lacking. The story doesn't specify that he's lacking anything, but we can see that he has, some things that are perhaps coming up a little short.